Everyone knows the sun burns. You have known this since childhood. It is one of those facts so thoroughly absorbed that it stopped feeling like information and became part of the background furniture of reality. A vast fireball out there burning impossibly hot and impossibly bright, and I am going to ask you to set that aside completely, not refine it or complicate it, but set it aside, because it is wrong, not approximately wrong or wrong in a poetic sense, but physically, mechanically, fundamentally wrong, and the sun has not burned. Not once, not for a single second across its 5 billion year history. And what is actually happening 150 million kilometers above your head right now is something so much stranger, so much more ancient and more fundamental than burning, that the moment you genuinely understand it, you will never look at the sky the same way again. And to get there, we need to start with why the burning story feels so convincing, because it does feel convincing. And verdict 1 is about the seductive wrongness of the most natural metaphor our species ever invented, which is fire, because fire is where we began. Our ancestors gathered around flames for warmth and light and safety. And when they looked at the sun, they saw the same thing scaled up to a cosmic size, something burning, something consuming fuel to produce heat and light. And the analogy seemed almost perfect. And when 19th century physicists finally had the mathematics to test it rigorously, they found that a sun made of the best fuel they could imagine, pure coal burning in pure oxygen, would exhaust its entire supply in approximately 10,000 years. And geologists were already finding rocks older than that, vastly older, which meant the burning hypothesis was not just incomplete, it was catastrophically wrong, off by a factor of 500,000. And the crisis this created in Victorian science was genuine and deep, because it meant that something was powering the sun that no one understood, that the most fundamental question about the object keeping every living thing on Earth alive had no answer. And Helmholtz proposed that gravitational contraction might do it, the sun slowly collapsing under its own weight and converting that gravitational energy to heat, which was elegant and still wrong, good for perhaps 20 million years, and the Earth was already known to be older than that. And the question remained open, embarrassingly open, a crack in the foundation of physical understanding, until the 20th century dropped something extraordinary through that crack and rewrote everything. And verdict 2 requires us to go somewhere most people's imagination never travels, which is inside the atom itself, because the answer to what powers the sun lives there and nowhere else. So hold a hydrogen atom in your mind, a single proton at the center with a single electron in a vast probability cloud around it. And now imagine 2 of these atoms approaching each other. And what happens under ordinary conditions is nothing useful, because both nuclei carry positive charge and like charges repel. The electromagnetic force between them pushes them apart before they can make contact. And this repulsion is called the Coulomb barrier. And at the temperatures and pressures found anywhere on Earth, it is essentially impenetrable. Hydrogen nuclei can collide 1 billion times per second and never once fuse. The barrier is simply too high, but the sun's core is not Earth. At a depth of roughly 150 billion meters below the surface, the temperature reaches 15 million degrees Celsius, and the pressure reaches 250 billion times the atmospheric pressure at Earth's surface. And at those conditions, the hydrogen nuclei move fast enough and pack tightly enough that something remarkable becomes not inevitable, but possible, something that has no analogy in everyday experience and no name in any language that existed before quantum mechanics was discovered, which is tunneling, the quantum mechanical phenomenon by which a particle can pass through a barrier it classically has no right to cross, not by going over it, but by going through it in a way that has no macroscopic equivalent. And this is not speculation or metaphor. It is one of the most precisely verified predictions in all of physics. And in the sun's core, it happens continuously. Hydrogen nuclei tunneling through the Coulomb barrier and fusing. And verdict 3 is where the story becomes genuinely astonishing because of what happens in that fusion, which is that 4 hydrogen nuclei combine through a chain of reactions to produce one helium nucleus, and a helium nucleus is measurably, verifiably, permanently lighter than the 4 hydrogen nuclei that went into making it, not by much, approximately 0.7% of the total mass. But that missing mass does not go anywhere in the conventional sense. It does not become heat in the chemical way that oxidation becomes heat. It ceases to be matter entirely and becomes energy, pure energy. At the exchange rate encoded in the most famous equation in science, energy equals mass, times the speed of light squared, and the speed of light is 300,000 kilometers per second. And when you square that number and multiply it by even a tiny amount of mass, the result is staggering, because this is not chemistry. Chemistry is the rearrangement of electrons in the outer shells of atoms. The nuclei themselves are untouched, and the energy released by chemical reactions is the energy stored in those electron configurations, which is genuinely small compared to the energy locked inside the nucleus itself, and fusion reaches into the nucleus and converts a fraction of the mass of matter directly into radiation, which is why the sun has been doing this for 5 billion years and has 5 billion years of hydrogen remaining, and why a piece of sugar undergoing complete fusion rather than combustion would release the energy of several atomic bombs rather than simply sweetening your coffee. And to feel the scale of what the sun is doing, consider that every second it converts approximately 600 million tons of hydrogen into helium, and in that process 4 million tons of mass simply ceases to exist as matter and becomes the light and heat pouring outward through the solar system. 4 million tons per second, every second for 5 billion years, without pausing, without variation, without any mechanism. Your intuition has a category 4, and verdict 4 is about the strangeness of the journey that energy takes before it reaches you, because the photon created by a fusion event in the sun's core does not travel straight to your skin in 8 minutes. The core of the sun is so dense that a photon cannot travel more than a centimeter before being absorbed and re-emitted in a random direction, and this random walk through the solar interior, this centuries-long pinball game through the plasma, means that the energy produced in the core takes approximately 100,000 years to reach the surface. 100,000 years of being absorbed and scattered and re-emitted in every direction before finally escaping into space. And then 8 minutes of travel at the speed of light across the vacuum between the sun and this pale blue dot, and the warmth you feel on your face right now, the light entering your eyes as you read these words, began its journey in the sun's core before our species existed, before language existed, before the first cave paintings were drawn on limestone walls, in the flickering light of fires that our ancestors genuinely believed resembled the thing in the sky. And Feynman loved this kind of revelation, the moment when patient calculation overturns an assumption so deeply held, it no longer felt like an assumption at all, because this is exactly what physics does at its best. It does not merely add facts, it replaces the wrong intuition with the right one, and the wrong intuition here is not a minor error. It is a complete misidentification of the physical category of the process involved. Burning is chemistry, fusion is nuclear physics, and the difference between those two things is not a matter of degree, but of kind. The difference between rearranging the furniture in a room and dismantling the walls themselves. And verdict 5 is the one that takes everything we have established and asks what it means that you are here to know it, because the fusion happening in the sun is not unique to our sun. It is the dominant process powering every one of the estimated 200 to 400 billion stars in the Milky Way alone, and the Milky Way is one of approximately 2 trillion galaxies in the observable universe, and each of those stars is performing the same fundamental alchemy, converting hydrogen to helium, converting mass to light, seeding their surroundings with the heavier elements produced in their cores and scattered in their depths, and every atom of carbon in your neurons, and every atom of oxygen in your lungs, and every atom of iron in your blood was produced inside a star that completed this process, that ran its hydrogen supply down and died, collapsing and exploding and scattering its substance across the interstellar medium, where it drifted for millions of years before gravitational collapse swept it into the cloud that became the sun, that became the earth, that became you. And you are therefore not merely warmed by fusion, you are the product of it, the downstream consequence of a process that has been running for most of the age of the universe, matter organized by stellar physics into a form complex enough to ask why the sun shines. And the answer contains the question, the fusion that powers the sun also built the brain asking about it. And in 1990, when Voyager turned its camera back toward the inner solar system from 6 billion kilometers away, the Earth appeared as a single pixel, a pale blue dot suspended in a sunbeam. And Sagan wrote that every human being who ever lived, every king and peasant, every act of creation and destruction, every love and every war happened on that point, that pale and insignificant and extraordinary point. And the sun that has been warming that point for 4.5 billion years, the sun that has never once burned in the chemical sense, the sun that converts mass to light through quantum tunneling and nuclear fusion at a rate of 4 million tons per second, is one of 200 billion stars in one of 2 trillion galaxies. And we are the part of that incomprehensible structure that found its way to consciousness, that assembled the physics from indirect evidence across centuries of careful observation, that looked at the sky and refused to accept the label of fire when the mechanism was so much stranger and so much more beautiful. And there is something in this, something Feynman pointed at when he said that the beauty of science is that it opens up such a greater appreciation of what the world actually is, and the world is this: a universe approximately 13.8 billion years old, in which hydrogen has been fusing into helium since the first stars formed 300 million years after the Big Bang, building up through carbon and oxygen and nitrogen and iron, all the elements that chemistry and biology require, and on at least one planet orbiting at least one of those stars that matter, organized itself into something capable of reconstructing the entire history of how it came to be. And the sun will continue this process for another 5 billion years, patient and precise and almost gentle, a whisper sustained across geological time rather than an explosion. And the light leaving it right now will reach your skin in 8 minutes, having started its journey 100,000 years ago. And you are the place where that ancient energy finally arrives at something that can understand where it came from, which is perhaps the most extraordinary thing in the known universe. Not the scale of it, not the number of stars or the age of the cosmos, but the fact that the cosmos produced, on this pale blue dot, in this brief window of cosmic time, something that looked at all of it and found it not merely large but meaningful, not merely old but beautiful, not merely physics but a story worth telling and worth hearing and worth carrying forward into whatever comes next. Keep looking up. If this video changed the way you think about the sun, about what you are made of, and about what it means that you exist to understand any of this, subscribe now and turn on notifications, because the next exploration goes even deeper. And tell us in the comments what feels most extraordinary to you: that the sun has never burned, that your warmth is 100,000 years old, or that you are made of the ash of stars that completed this same process long before Earth existed. If this video changed the way you think about your own body, energy, and what the second law of thermodynamics actually means for the way you live, subscribe now and turn on notifications, because the next exploration goes even deeper. And tell us in the comments, does understanding the physics of how you age change the way you think about the energy you have right now?